The courtroom was so quiet you could hear the hum of the ceiling lights. My husband, ex-husband I should say, and his mother were sitting just a few feet away, celebrating like they'd already won. Brandon leaned toward his attorney with a smug grin, adjusting the cufflinks I had given him on our 10th anniversary. Evelyn sat poised beside him, her white blouse tucked perfectly beneath her designer jacket, her pearls gleaming under the courtroom lights. She clapped softly, deliberately, like she was at an opera and the final act had come to its tragic close. Except I was the one on stage, and this wasn't a performance. This was my life being carved apart with polished fingernails and forged paperwork. Brandon's lawyer stood, polished and practiced, flipping through a folder thick with documents and smiling with every word. "Your Honor," he said, gesturing theatrically, as these records clearly demonstrate the Lakewood house was substantially remodeled with funds from Mr. Whitmore's business accounts. Likewise, the jewelry in question, antique pieces from the Wallace family, were used multiple times as collateral for loans that benefited the family as a whole and were therefore jointly owned. Evelyn nodded at every word, dabbing fake tears from her eyes as if this court was her private stage. Brandon leaned back with the grace of a man who thought the game was already over. They thought I'd crumble. I didn't. I sat still in my seat, spine straight, hands folded calmly atop the slim black folder I had brought with me. I wore a simple black dress. No makeup, no earrings, no wedding ring, just silence. But it was a different kind of silence now. Not the suffocating kind that kept me in our Connecticut house for years, pretending things were fine. This silence had edges, purpose, and it would cut. My attorney, David Granger, had begged me not to go this route. "Sabrina," he whispered outside the courthouse just 30 minutes earlier, "this could backfire. If the judge doesn't accept the document, they'll shred us. You know that, right?" I had looked past him at the grand marble pillars of the court entrance. They're playing with forged documents and rehearsed lies. If I follow their rules, I lose. It's time they played by mine. He didn't say another word, just nodded and held the door open. And now here we were. I watched the judge flip through the file Brandon's attorney had presented. He was an older man, gray beneath his glasses, lines deep across his brow. His eyes seemed tired of liars. My heart pounded, but my hands remained still. No trembling, no fear, only purpose. The lawyer finished his speech with a triumphant tone. "In short, Your Honor, my client only asks for what is rightfully his. A man who gave everything to his family, who supported his wife's career, who deserves a fair and just division of assets." The courtroom paused. Evelyn dabbed her eye again, clutching her pearls dramatically. Brandon adjusted his tie. The judge looked toward me. "Mrs. Wallace," he said, voice neutral, "do you have anything to submit in response?" Brandon's smirk deepened. Evelyn sat up straighter. They were ready for a meltdown. Tears, a desperate plea. But I simply stood. My heels clicked against the tile floor as I walked to David and handed him the single sheet of paper I had kept hidden until now. He unfolded it, scanned the lines, and froze. His eyes shot up to mine, stunned. "Your Honor," David said, voice firmer now. "The defense respectfully requests that this new document be entered into the record." He passed it to the court clerk, then the judge. The room shifted. You could feel it, a tension cutting through the smug confidence in Brandon's jawline. The judge slipped on his glasses, read the paper slowly. His brow twitched. Then his lips parted ever so slightly. He read it again, then looked up. "Having reviewed the certificate of marriage between Mr. Brandon Whitmore and Ms. Monica Reyes, dated June 2nd, 2001, with no documentation of legal dissolution provided," he paused, his gaze scanning the gallery, stopping directly on Brandon. "This court finds that the subsequent marriage between Mr. Whitmore and Mrs. Wallace, dated September 5th, 2004, is legally invalid. It is null and void from inception, Every sound vanished. The only thing I could hear was the sound of Evelyn's breath hitching beside me. Her hands, once poised in applause, now trembled in her lap. Brandon's face turned pale, his tan mask dissolving beneath courtroom fluorescence. I turned to them, not with anger, not with triumph, but with something far colder. "There is no jointly owned property," I said clearly. "There is no marriage, and there never was." That silence, it shattered louder than any scream. I didn't wait to see their faces collapse. I didn't need to. The silence in that courtroom told me everything I needed to know. The judge called a recess, his voice dry and even, but the damage had already detonated. The illusion Brandon and Evelyn had built, 15 years of smiles, Sunday brunches, Christmas cards, crumbled in an instant. And I hadn't even raised my voice. David caught up to me in the hallway. He looked breathless, almost exhilarated. "Sabrina, that was—" he trailed off, shaking his head. "Genius doesn't even begin to cover it. You should have seen their faces." But I didn't feel victorious. Not even close. My knees were shaking beneath my coat. My breath shallow. I had just torn the last thread connecting me to the life I'd built. It didn't feel like a triumph. It felt like cauterizing a wound, one that still bled beneath the surface. Outside, the October wind hit my face like a slap. For the first time in weeks, I realized I was still alive. I could feel my skin again. Cold, raw, real. David was already outlining next steps. "We'll file a counterclaim first thing tomorrow. Full recovery of all property he fraudulently listed as joint. The Lakewood house, the car, the business investments, everything he tried to register under his name. And we'll pursue damages for fraud and emotional distress." I nodded, though I barely registered the words. I wasn't thinking about lawsuits or statements. I was thinking about how many years I'd spent believing Brandon was my partner, my protector. I thought of the woman I was on our wedding day, hair pinned up, heart wide open, holding hands with a man who was never even mine. That night, the headlines exploded. Real estate mogul Brandon Whitmore exposed as bigamist. Court nullifies marriage after shocking reveal. Who is Monica Reyes? The media didn't need my help. They found their villain in Brandon, and they painted me as the silent woman who brought the truth into the light. I didn't read the articles. I couldn't. But the calls came anyway. Old friends, coworkers, relatives I hadn't heard from in years, all asking the same question. "Are you okay?" I didn't know how to answer. What does okay mean when your entire life has been a lie? When the man who shared your bed every night had a secret wife tucked into his past like an insurance policy? The next attack came fast. I should have seen it coming. 3 days after the courtroom implosion, Evelyn struck back, not through lawyers, but through the press. First, it was online forums, then gossip blogs, then print. Sabrina Wallace, gold digger or strategic manipulator? Anonymous sources reveal Sabrina's lavish spending habits. Was it love, or was she after the money all along? They painted me as a predator, a woman who knew about Monica, a woman who seduced Brandon to climb the ladder. They dug through photos of me wearing dresses Brandon bought, called them evidence of greed, claimed I lived far beyond my teacher's salary, that I must have had other benefactors. I was a high school literature teacher in a respected private academy in Cambridge. I had built a reputation, year after year, among students, parents, and faculty. And now, that reputation was crumbling under weightless accusations. The headmaster called me into her office one morning. She was kind, measured, but her words were dipped in caution. "We understand you're going through a personal matter, Sabrina, but the school is receiving concerned emails from parents. They're worried about media attention, about the image." I smiled, nodded, reassured her I'd keep things professional. But when I walked out of that room, something cracked inside me. They weren't just attacking my finances or my marriage. They were coming for my integrity. for the one part of my life that still felt untarnished. I sat at my kitchen table that evening, staring at my laptop. Another article had just gone live. A quote from an anonymous friend of the family, saying I had manipulated Brandon from the beginning, that I was unstable, that I might be dangerous. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I wanted to type a response, to scream the truth into the void, to tell the world what had really happened. But David's voice echoed in my mind. If you defend yourself, you legitimize the lies. They want you reactive. Don't give them that. And he was right. So I closed the laptop, sat in silence, and let the rage settle deep into my bones. That night, I made a call. My voice didn't shake this time. David, I'm done playing defense. They want war. Let's give it to them. I started with the only place I could, my father. Richard Wallace had died 15 years ago in a car crash. Or at least, that's what I had been told. A rainy night, a winding road just outside Ridgefield, Connecticut, a burned-out vehicle. No survivors. They said the brakes failed. They said it was an accident. I was 23. I was in graduate school. And Brandon had handled everything. The funeral, the estate, the paperwork. He told me he didn't want me to be burdened with the details, so I never asked for them. But now I couldn't ignore the details. Not anymore. I took the train to my father's old house, the one he had lived in before Brandon, and I moved him into the guest house on our property. The house had long since been sold, but I still had the keys to the basement storage unit he used as a makeshift archive. Brandon had always called it junk, and I remembered how quickly he insisted we throw most of it out. But some of it, thank God, was still there. I spent hours down there in the damp cold, pulling open boxes, flipping through old folders, receipts, yellowing blueprints. I found a few of my father's journals, a few letters, old business plans for a construction company I didn't even know he had been part of. Most of it seemed unrelated, but something told me to keep digging. At the bottom of a metal filing cabinet, I found it. Tucked inside a tattered copy of Structural Load Bearing for Civil Engineers. His favorite technical manual was a folded piece of paper. Not a contract, not a will, a note, handwritten. The ink had faded, but the words were still legible. Disappearing funds. No explanation. Pressured into agreement. RK suggested quick sale. No way out. RK. Brandon Whitmore. My father had been in business with him. Or at the very least, he had trusted him with something. The last line hit me like ice water. Did what I had to do. No other choice. It wasn't just a sale. It was a forced agreement. A cornered man. A father trying to protect something or someone. I sat on the cold concrete floor and stared at that page for a long time. The walls of the storage unit felt like they were closing in. What if the car crash wasn't just an accident? What if my father had been silenced? Or worse, manipulated into disappearing? The rage I had buried for years, beneath politeness, beneath grief, began to surface. Brandon hadn't just taken my marriage. He had stolen my family history, rewritten it in real estate transfers and obituaries. The next morning, I made another call. David, I said, I want a full investigation. I want to go back, all the way back, to every deal Brandon's touched, every signature, every shell company, every piece of land. And I want eyes on that name, RK. Anything that connects Brandon to my father. David didn't hesitate. I'll get my guy. We'll start with property records and firm registries. I'll need a list of every place your father lived or worked. I didn't even have to think. I remember the land near Lake Candlewood. That was his pride. He called it untouchable. Brandon called it useless. But Dad always said we'd build something there someday. David sounded intrigued. Lake Candlewood. That's where Brandon developed his first commercial retreat, right? Exactly, I whispered. But that wasn't our land. Not anymore. Brandon sold it, or bought it, sometime after my dad died. I never saw the paperwork. David grunted. You will now. That night, I went back to my apartment and took out an old family photo album. I stared at pictures of my father, his kind eyes, his awkward ties, the grease on his hands from working late in the garage. He used to build me tree houses out of leftover lumber. He used to tell me stories about bridges and roads like they were living things. And I let them turn him into a footnote. I stared at the handwritten note again. The pen had pressed hard into the page, certain phrases underlined twice. No other choice. RK. Quick sale. This wasn't business. This was coercion. This was pressure from someone he trusted. Brandon. The realization hit like a punch to the chest. Brandon hadn't just betrayed me. He had been circling my family like a vulture long before I ever walked down the aisle. He hadn't married me for love. He had married me for access. I wanted to believe I still had someone on my side. One person. Just one. Jessica. And I had been best friends since undergrad. She was there when I first met Brandon at a fundraiser. She was there when I bought my wedding dress. When my father died. When I miscarried our second child and didn't tell anyone. She was the one person who saw through the polished holiday cards and Pinterest perfect brunches. Or at least I thought she did. But something had shifted. At first, it was small. A strange hesitance when I brought up Brandon's lies. Her eyes darting away when I mentioned the court hearing. Her changing the subject when I told her about the forged documents. Then came the moment that set every alarm off. We were sitting in a quiet cafe, same corner booth as always. I told her about the note I'd found, my father's handwriting, the initials RK, the forced land deal. My voice shook, but I needed to say it out loud. She looked down at her tea, stirring it for far too long. Then she said, almost flatly, "Maybe you're reading too much into it. It was years ago. Maybe your dad made a tough decision. It happens." I froze. "Jess, you don't believe me?" She smiled too fast. "Of course I do. I think you're stressed. You've been through so much. Maybe it's time to let it go and focus on the future." But her tone wasn't soft. It was careful, measured, like someone reading from a script. That's when the suspicion hardened into certainty. I didn't say anything more that day, just nodded, hugged her, let her leave first. But as soon as I got home, I picked up the phone and called David. "I think Jessica is feeding Brandon information." There was a beat of silence. "You're sure?" he asked. "No," I said, "but I will be." I asked David to help me set up a trap. I needed to confirm what I was already dreading. He didn't ask for details, just said, "Give me a day." The next evening, his tech guy came over. Some quiet kid named Miles who looked barely old enough to drive, but could probably hack the Pentagon before breakfast. He installed a tiny camera in the ceiling light fixture of my living room, disguised as a smoke detector, then a sensitive microphone tucked inside a decorative bowl on the coffee table. Invisible, undetectable. I texted Jessica that night. "Can you come over tomorrow? I really need to talk. I think I'm giving up." She replied in less than a minute. "Of course, honey. I'll be there." The next day, I played my part. I dimmed the lights, put on sweatpants, made tea, and sat with my back slouched like I hadn't slept in weeks. Jessica arrived right on time, bearing pastries and that same overly sweet smile she always wore when she was nervous. "I told David I'm done," I said, voice barely above a whisper. "I'm going to take Brandon's settlement offer. I just want it all to stop. I can't fight anymore." Her eyes widened, then quickly softened. "Sabrina, I'm so glad. This is the best decision you've made in months. It's not worth your health." I kept nodding, let her pat my hand, let her offer to help me draft a statement. Then I excused myself to the bathroom, turned the shower on, stood by the door in silence. I didn't have to wait long. Through the faint sound of running water, I heard her voice. "L'eau. Urgent." Yeah, she bought it. Completely. She's going to settle. Says she can't take it anymore. Yeah, no, she has no idea. She thinks David's just dragging his feet. Brandon said to make sure the paperwork's ready by Friday. And Zoya, sorry, Evelyn wants her to sign before the next hearing. Yeah. No, she didn't mention the land again. I think we're in the clear. But just in case, let's make her look unstable, okay? If she changes her mind, we bury her. My hands were trembling, not from fear, from the cold clarity that comes when the last lie finally collapses. I walked back into the living room like nothing happened. Jessica jumped slightly, then smiled too wide. Just talking to my mom, she said, slipping her phone into her purse. She worries, you know. I smiled back. Of course, moms. She didn't stay long after that. Claimed she had a late meeting, hugged me too tightly, and left with a flourish of false affection. As soon as the door closed, I raced my laptop, downloaded the recording, and played it back with headphones. Every word, every betrayal, every confirmation. I stared at the screen, but all I saw was her face. The face I had trusted with every secret, every heartbreak. And now she had handed me over to the people trying to destroy me. She didn't just betray me. She joined them. And now I was at war, completely and utterly alone. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. The audio played in my head on a loop. Jessica's voice, so familiar, now so foreign, whispering about destroying me, about making me look unstable, about burying me if I changed my mind. They weren't just planning to win. They were planning to erase me. By morning, the rage had cooled into something far more dangerous. Focus. I texted David a single sentence. Set the trap. I'm going to feed her what they want to hear. I played my part perfectly. Called Jessica the next day with trembling breath and tearful voice. Told her I'd lost all hope. That I wasn't looking into my father's documents anymore. That I just wanted peace. She swallowed every word. I knew by that afternoon Brandon and Evelyn would believe I had given up. That's when the envelope arrived. No return address. Just my name, handwritten in tight block letters. Inside was a stack of documents, photocopies of offshore bank transfers, account statements, and something that made my hands shake so hard I almost dropped the papers. Each account was registered under either Brandon Whitmore or Evelyn Whitmore. Each deposit, hundreds of thousands at a time, dated suspiciously close to my father's death. And at the bottom of one of the spreadsheets, barely legible in the notes column, were 5 words that made my stomach turn. Project Landon expense closure complete. Landon. I knew that name. Brandon had mentioned him once, spit it out like a curse. Some failed business partner, a rival who didn't play fair. I had no idea what he meant back then. Now, it sounded like a buried war. I called David immediately. Someone's trying to help us. Someone on the inside. Or someone who wants Brandon taken down for their own reasons, David replied. Either way, we follow it. We trace the accounts back to a network of shell companies registered in Delaware and the Cayman Islands. The amounts were staggering. Some deposits matched the exact amount my father once had in his construction fund, a fund that, on paper, had vanished after his death. This wasn't just embezzlement, David said grimly. This was a full-scale laundering operation. If we can link this to Brandon and prove the money came from Richard's holdings, we're no longer in civil court. We're in criminal territory. But the documents weren't enough on their own. We needed someone who could connect the dots from the inside, someone who knew the game. That's when I remembered the name on the expense note. Landon. I searched his company online. Still active, still thriving. Philip Landon, CEO of Landon Development Group, Boston-based, low profile, powerful, and based on what Brandon had said all those years ago, vengeful. I didn't have a plan, just desperation and a hunch. I created a fake email address under the name Anna Volsky, posing as an investigative journalist looking into real estate fraud. I sent a short message to the press contact listed on Landon's website. I wrote, I have documents linking Whitmore properties to offshore accounts and financial misconduct involving Project Landon. I'd like a statement. I didn't expect a reply, but 24 hours later, I received a brief message. Mr. Landon will see you. Tomorrow, 4 p.m., Landon Plaza, 15th floor. I almost dropped my phone. The next day, I borrowed a suit from Helen, our office manager at the academy, tied my hair back, walked into the marble lobby of Landon Plaza like I belonged there, even though my hands were sweating through the cuffs. They led me to a glass-walled office overlooking the entire Boston skyline. And there he was, Philip Landon, mid-40s, gray suit, clean lines, a face like stone. He didn't smile. "You have 15 minutes," he said. "Speak." I started with my script. My fake name, my fake role, my vague insinuations. He didn't blink. After 5 minutes, he raised a hand. "Stop," he said flatly. "You're not a journalist." I froze. Journalists come with facts. You came with feelings. He leaned forward. "Who are you really?" I took a breath. Let go of the performance. "My name is Sabrina Wallace," I said. "Brandon Whitmore is my husband." Or was. The marriage was annulled. I found documents linking his family to offshore accounts and to the death of my father. Project Landon shows up in the statements. I need to know what it was. His eyes narrowed. Then, slowly, he leaned back in his chair. "I knew he'd slip eventually," Landon murmured. He stood and walked to a filing cabinet, pulled out a thick folder, slammed it on the table. He stole my idea, my blueprint, my entire development model. He and his mother faked contracts, blackmailed partners, took everything. I waited 15 years to get my hands on this. He tapped the folder. "It's yours, with one condition." I met his gaze. Cold, calculated, dangerous. "Brandon Whitmore," he said slowly, "doesn't just go down. He gets erased. Publicly. Legally. Completely." I didn't hesitate. I want the same thing. I left Landon Plaza with a folder that weighed more than just paper. Inside were 10 years' worth of secrets. Business filings, shell company names, forged contracts, blackmail notes, and blueprints that had been stolen and sold. Philip Landon hadn't just handed me evidence. He had handed me a loaded weapon. David's reaction was immediate. He scanned the documents with the intensity of a surgeon mid-operation. "This connects everything," he muttered. "Offshore laundering, asset transfers, the fake trust fund. And look, your father's name. Here, twice. Sabrina, they didn't just steal from him. They erased him." We filed a new motion the next morning. Not for divorce. Not for property. For fraud. Criminal conspiracy. Financial misconduct. But the Whitmores weren't done. The very same day, an anonymous complaint triggered a full-blown audit of the education consulting business I co-founded 3 years ago. Inspectors came in like a SWAT team, pulling records, interrogating staff, freezing accounts. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't random. It was Evelyn. She knew we were closing in, so she tried to destroy the one thing I had built on my own. That night, as I sat alone in the wreckage of our small office, sifting through piles of accusations and lawyer threats, I received another envelope. This one didn't come by mail. It was hand-delivered. No note, just a USB drive inside a black sleeve. I plugged it into my laptop with shaking fingers. What loaded onto the screen wasn't documents. It was footage, black and white, grainy, dated 15 years ago. It was from a traffic camera near Ridgefield, near the site of my father's accident. I saw a car pull onto a rural road. My father's car, the old black Volvo. He got out. He looked nervous, kept glancing behind him. Then another vehicle pulled up. A dark SUV. A man got out. The resolution was poor, but my body recognized him before my brain did. Brandon. He was younger, but it was him. The walk, the profile, the stance. They spoke for 2 minutes. Then my father got into the SUV, left his Volvo behind. 10 minutes later, a fireball lit up the right side of the frame, where the Volvo had been parked. I stared at the screen, frozen. David, watching over my shoulder, whispered that was staged. Sabrina, your father didn't die in that crash. A second file played. Airport footage. A man in a hat and sunglasses buying a one-way ticket to Prague. The date matched the day of my father's funeral. He handed over passport. The name read Sergei Volkov. But the man was Richard Wallace. My father. Alive. He didn't die. He ran. With Brandon's help. The air in my lungs turned thick and bitter. Every breath was a betrayal. The man I had grieved for, mourned for, built a shrine to in my memory had walked away. He had left me to live with monsters. David said something about private investigators, about tracking Richard down, about extradition. I barely heard it. I just stared at the still image on the screen. My father's profile, walking past security, shoulders hunched like a ghost trying not to be seen. He wasn't a victim. He was part of it. Maybe not all of it. Maybe not from the start. But he knew. And he disappeared anyway. The next morning, I met Jessica in the park. She acted relieved. Thought the silence meant I had given up. Her smile was wide, eyes sympathetic, voice sickly sweet. I stared at her for a long time before speaking. I know everything, I said. She blinked. What? I know you were working with them. I know you fed them every word I said. I know what you did, and I know who you did it for. She gasped, went pale, denied, deflected. I didn't argue. I just turned around and walked away. I was done with people who used my love as currency. By the end of the week, with Landon's team backing David, we filed full federal charges. The story broke nationally. Whitmore family empire built on fraud. Offshore accounts, blackmail, and a fake death. The Sabrina Wallace files. Is Evelyn Whitmore the mastermind behind Connecticut's largest real estate con? Public sympathy shifted fast. The media turned. The social circles that once toasted Brandon now ghosted him. His empire collapsed in under 3 weeks. And me? I didn't celebrate. I packed up my apartment, turned off my phone, and drove to the coast. Alone. Sat on the beach with wind in my hair and salt in my mouth. I thought about all the things I had lost, and all the things I had survived. My father was still out there. Brandon and Evelyn would face a courtroom again. This time, not for property, but for prison. Jessica had vanished. Cowards always do when the mask falls off. But I remained, and that would always be enough. They tried to break me. They failed. I buried the woman who once needed their approval. The wife, the daughter, the friend. What rose from her ashes was something they'd never be able to burn.